absolutely delighted to welcome Deepak Chopra to LinkedIn. So how about a big round of applause? He asked Steve Cadigan earlier for some additional context about LinkedIn, and by now I'm sure he's internalized all of it and will be. You think I'm kidding. Wait until you see what he's going to be able to do with who we are as a company, where we want to go. But he also was asking for a little bit of data, and he already knows about the rapid rate of growth, et cetera. And for those that weren't here in February of last year, and it's probably a pretty sizable number of us, I did an all hands, and at the beginning of the all hands, we did a presentation, and it was entitled Our Story. Does anyone remember that? Okay, excellent. So we were talking a little bit about the narrative, the story of who we are in our platform and all the good we can do in the world. As I was teeing up that narrative, I don't know if you'll recall, but I said one of the wisest men I know once told me that we are the stories that we tell. Does anyone remember that? So that was him. That's completely true. So that was Deepak, and that is one of many, many insights that have had a profound impact on me and tens, if not hundreds of millions of people around the world who have had the great privilege to be able to read his insights and the way he thinks, his vision, or even better still, to have a chance to meet him in person. He has been enormously, almost invaluably influential on my own career and my own view of the world. He knows that. I remind him every time we have, or I get the pleasure to speak with him, whether it's riffing or brainstorming on business, spirituality, mind-body connections. One of the things I would challenge all of us to try and do is come up with the most challenging questions that you could possibly conceive of. I mentioned that earlier today. You'll see Deepak will do the same in challenging you, and he will answer every one of those questions. Because as extraordinary as Deepak is within the realm of spirituality, what a lot of people don't realize is he's equally well steeped in the world of quantum physics. And it's this combination of both Eastern and Western philosophy that I think sets Deepak apart from many of the world's great influencers and thinkers. He's the author of over 60 books. I believe is 18 New York Times bestsellers by now. Yeah, give or take a few. He's lost count. He's lost count. There's not much more I can say about Deepak other than the fact that in part what brought him here today is his new book, The Soul of Leadership, which essentially at its heart is about the fact that all of us have the ability and the potential to be leaders as long as we're in touch with who we are and the value that we can bring to others. And with that, it is an absolute delight to welcome Deepak Chopra to LinkedIn.
Thanks, Jeff. Good to see you. We should be in touch a little more often. Thank you everyone for being here, and just a delight to be here and be with you, share some ideas with you, but also hopefully in a way continue this conversation, because LinkedIn has huge potential to heal the planet, and in many ways, if we have a vision for what we want in the world, and at least I do, peaceful, just, sustainable, healthy, happy, then you are the global network, the new synaptic connections of the planetary mind. And this is a great opportunity. So I'm going to start with a story, because in the end, it's the story we are going to tell ourselves about our life that will unlock the potential inside us as leaders. My story begins when I was 7 years of age, living in a small town in India called Jabalpur. My brother was at that time 4 years old. He's now the dean of medical education at Harvard Medical School, so I'm very proud of him. My father was an army doctor, first in the British Army, then in the Indian Army. My mother was the best mother in the world. And we read in the newspaper that Mr. Nehru, our first Prime Minister of India after independence from Great Britain, was coming to our little town, then little, now it's a big city. He was going to cut the ribbon to open an automobile factory. And so for 3 weeks, there was only one conversation in our house, breakfast, lunch, dinner. And it was my mother asking what color sari I should wear for the occasion. And my father would tease her. He would say, there are going to be lots of people there. Mr. Nehru is not going to notice the color of your sari. Well, on the day that he arrived, we were there at 4 o'clock in the morning on the street. Me, my little brother, my father in his army uniform with his medals from the Second World War, my mother in a pink sari. And by 7 o'clock, there were millions of people on the street. We were there at 4. And in India, when I say millions, it means millions, okay? It doesn't mean thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. It means millions. It's a seething mass of humanity. People standing on each other's shoulders, people hanging by window ledges, on treetops, rambunctious, noisy, cantankerous. We had lost our privileged position on the street. And the motorcade came around 9 o'clock, so we had been there for 5 hours. Okay. And it turned the corner, and Mr. Nehru was standing in a jeep. That was it, all by himself with a driver. He was wearing his, what's now called a Nehru jacket. After I'm wearing one now, but it was white. And he had a red rose in his lapel, which was his signature. And there was a motorcycle in the front and a motorcycle in the back. And it slowly kind of turned the corner, came by us, and swear to God this is true. As soon as it had passed by us, Mr. Nehru suddenly turned. He looked at my mother, he took his rose out and he threw it at her. And the crowd gasped, except for her. She stepped forward like a queen, and she picked up the rose and she looked at my father and she said, "Daddy, what did I tell you?" Okay, now let's go home. That was my mother. She was the leader in our house. My father wore the medals. She was the leader. So we went home and she emptied a room, which was our library. And in the center of the room, she placed a little table on the top of the table of vase and a flower, the rose. And for 3 weeks, people came to our house to look at the rose. It was the talk of our town. Mr. Nehru threw a rose at Mrs. Chopra. And in India, when you go to a place of veneration, you take your shoes off, you tiptoe into the room like it was a holy sanctum of sanctums, this room. And then they would go into the room in silence and they would look at it. That's all. After 3 weeks, the rose started to fade, and my mother had a party. And she invited a lot of friends, and at the end of the party, everybody got a faded rose petal. And you should have seen the look on the people's faces when they received this one little rose petal, faded. It was like they were getting a family heirloom or a jewel or a diamond. So, of course, being 7 years of age, not knowing what was really going on, I asked my mother, what was so special about those rose petals? And she said, they represent the soul of India. And I had no idea what that meant, the soul of... First of all, a lot of people don't think they have a soul anyway. But the soul of India was a big concept for me. And so I asked her to explain what that was. And she said, that Mahatma Gandhi, who had been assassinated a few years earlier, was the symbolic soul of the nation because he represented their dreams. He represented their aspirations, their longings, their desires. And of course, since he had passed away, assassinated, Nehru was his spiritual heir, and the rose petals reminded everybody of their dream. And so that gave me the definition for this book. I've been teaching this course at Kellogg for the last 9 years almost to business leaders at Kellogg Business School, the executive program. It's called The Soul of Leadership. The book you have is a very concise representation of what's in that course, but here's my definition of the soul. It comes from my mother. The leader is, first of all, this definition of the leader. The leader is the symbolic soul of a group consciousness. That group could be a family, it could be a community, it could be a business, it could be an institution like this organization, it could be a political party, it could be a nation, it could be the world. But the principles are exactly the same. When you as a person represent the dreams of those you care for, and there's a bond between you. It's more than an emotional bond, it's a spiritual bond, and I'll talk to you about that in a moment. Because it's in this deepest part of ourselves that we call our core consciousness that we represent in almost unmanifest form, because we're not even aware of ourselves, of what the richness and in the depths of our souls is, where we dream, where we have longing, aspirations, desires, where we find meaning, context, where we build relationships, and where we have the potential to actualize our wholeness. I'm a medical doctor, so it's, I'm talking to you right now and you're mostly in the technology fields. And so we consider ourselves scientists, at least, medical people consider themselves scientists, biologists. I'm sure being technologically oriented, you also think that science is the way of the future. And when you talk to scientists or technologists or biologists or mathematicians about the soul, they say, well, what is it? What is the soul? Does it even exist? We know we have a body, we can see it, we can touch it. We know we have a mind because we experience our thoughts. But what's the soul? Where is the soul? Do we even have a soul? How many people here think they don't have a soul? Anybody? Well, I'm glad. Okay, there you are, at least one person. There you are, at least one person. Well, in the majority of scientists, we speak to scientific audiences, they say, where is this thing that you call the soul? In the last century, people would weigh a person before they died, and then they'd weigh him afterwards to see if something left. And since there was no difference in the weight, they at least came to one conclusion, scientific: if you have a soul, it probably doesn't weigh anything. In our own century, there was a brilliant scientist, Wilder Penfield. He was a neurosurgeon, and he would operate on his patients when he would do surgery. Those days they had surgery, 1950s. They would do surgery under local anesthesia, and he would actually stimulate different parts of the brain to see, how the brain controls the body. And under local anesthesia, because the brain doesn't have any pain receptors. So you can cut through the brain and there's no pain. And so one day Dr. Penfield was operating on a young man, and he stimulated the motor cortex. The motor cortex controls movement. So the patient's arm started to go like this. And he asked the patient, what's happening? And the patient said, my arm is moving up. And so Dr. Penfield then said to the patient, are you moving your arm? And he said, no, it's moving up mechanically. You're moving it for me by stimulating my brain. And at that moment, Dr. Penfield did something very clever. He said to the patient, I'm going to stimulate your brain in order to make your arm go up like this, but I want you to make a choice and move it somewhere else. And so even as he was stimulating the brain, the patient's arm wanted to go up like this. The patient resisted that and then moved it in a different direction. And with that simple observation, Dr. Penfield came to a stunning observation, a conclusion. He said the brain is telling the body to go like this, but there's someone else here who's telling the brain, I'm not going to let you go like this, I'm going to go like this. He said there's a choice maker that can override the commands of the brain to the body. And he said, I know where the command post is, but where is the commander? And he said, I can't find the commander. And he did many similar experiments. I'm not maybe reporting all of them totally accurately, but just one more. On another occasion, he was stimulating the sensory cortex. Sensory cortex is where all the sensations of the world come into our brain. But everything that you call experience in your brain is an electrical firing. That's all there is, electrochemical firings. It's like the internet. Okay, neurons fire, electrical impulses. Whether you're seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, all you see in the brain is electrochemistry. How that becomes internal experience, sensations, sounds, tastes, smells, images, all of that, no one knows. Talking of phenomena like this, a great scientist like Sir Arthur Eddington gave the best explanation. He said, something unknown is doing we don't know what. But leaving that aside, we have no idea how we perceive or we feel or experience subjectivity. No idea, with all the science we have. Because today you can actually track a thought in the brain by taking a carbon atom, putting it in a sugar molecule, and then injecting it into the body and watching what happens when a person thinks. So you can track thoughts. But the question remains, whose thought and where is this person? Okay, so Dr. Penfield was trying to figure that out too, and he asked, as he stimulated the sensory cortex, the person said, I'm at a picnic. She was a woman. I'm at a picnic, I'm with my children, we're listening to music, we're having sandwiches, there's traffic on the street, my children are playing. And he said, are you at the picnic? She said, no, I'm having surgery. And Dr. Penfield said, she's having a certain experience, but she knows that she's not having the experience, that it's a hallucination. There's an interpreter behind the scenes who knows the difference between what is real and what's not real. And then in frustration, with lots of other experiments like this, Dr. Penfield said, there's an interpreter, there's a choice maker, and I cannot find the choice maker or the interpreter in the brain or in the body. By the way, his work is now housed in Princeton University in the archives, Mysteries of the Mind and Brain and so on. And the question remains, where is the choice maker that we call me and the interpreter that I call me? Because that's all you are. Your essential state is that in every second you're making choices and interpretations. Every thought that you have, by the way, is either a choice, which means it's some desire to do something, okay, or it's an interpretation. Because all thoughts are either about the future or about the past. So they're, in a sense, variants of choices and interpretations. And that's the essential you, but that you cannot be found in your body or in your brain. And in science, there's a very simple principle. It's called Occam's principle. Occam's razor, named after a scientist, Occam. And he said, when you don't have an explanation for something, the best explanation is the simplest explanation. So what would you think is the reason you can't be found in your body? Anyone? Come on. Why can't you be found in your body? You're not in it. So, people these days talk about outer body experiences when the real mystery is how do we get an in-body experience? Because we're not in it. We are not in it. And this was the great genius of seers in India that we call rishis, thousands of years ago. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, which is an Upanishad, Krishna says, I'm not in the body is in me. I'm not in the mind is in me. I'm not at LinkedIn is in me. I'm not in the world is in me. And the me that they talk about is non-local. Non-local means simple, no location, either in space or time. And so without going in, you mentioned quantum physics, so I'm just going to give you a very brief glimpse of this. Your spirit, your soul, your intelligence, your interpreter in you, your choice maker is non-local, which means doesn't exist in space-time. That's my proposition to you. And it's a minority position in science. But a lot of scientists, including Sir Roger Penrose, who was a former tutor of Stephen Hawking, with whose collaborator I'm doing my next book called War of the World Views. Many scientists, but still a minority, are saying that consciousness, your core consciousness, who you are, actually exists at the most fundamental levels of creation, at what they call Planck scale space-time geometry, which is 25 orders smaller than in order of magnitude than an atom. When you get that level, 25 times smaller than the order of magnitude to an atom, everything disappears. There's no energy, there's no information, there's no space-time. There are no objects. All that's left is the fundamental building blocks of the universe, but not as building blocks, but as possibilities. So fundamental building blocks of the universe like space, time, gravity, curvature of space-time, mass, spin, charge, these are the things that ultimately create the physical universe. But according to some, also the fundamental building blocks of the mind, truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, evolution, mathematical truth, musical truth, because music and mathematics speak the language of nature. Mathematics speaks of how the laws of nature are construed, and music is the harmony that exists, the correlation that exists in nature. So not only are the fundamental building blocks of mind, or matter, but also mind, exists as potential. And our individual consciousness is part of this ocean of consciousness that projects itself as the universe. If you're religious, you could call it God. Okay, but if you're not, you could say it's a field of possibilities. It's a field of correlation. It's a field of uncertainty because it proliferates with uncertainty. It's non-computable. You cannot, there's no algorithm that can describe it. It's a field of creativity. It's also an intention field. One of my colleagues, Marilyn Schlitz, is right here. Please. She's has been the science director, the director for science in the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is a place quite close to here, founded by Edgar Mitchell, who walked on the moon, and on his way back saw this beautiful little planet where we have all our problems, and founded the Noetic Sciences, and she's been director of research and now the CEO of that foundation for 40 years at least?
Well, I haven't been
No, but the institute.
for just about 40 years.
40 years they've collected scientific data on what we would now call non-local dormant potentials that we all have. I'm going at length to say this because, we're in a new era. We're in a new era where science is talking about neuroplasticity, how you can change your brain, genetic indeterminism, how you can turn your genes on and off. Science is talking about quantum entanglement, quantum biology, creativity in nature, uncertainty, free will, choice. These are things that science is beginning to address. And an old mechanistic science no longer explains these things. A mechanistic science will not be able to explain creativity, true creativity. No computers will be able to simulate creativity, but true creativity will never happen because creativity is not algorithmic. It depends on uncertainty. It depends on the proliferation of uncertainty. So the most basic questions that we have, who am I? Do I have a soul? Does God exist? What happens to me after I die? What is the source of insight, of imagination, of intuition, of creativity, of inspiration, of choice making? These are not explainable through any mechanistic science. Any science that we would call the science of the past. You have to begin to look at the new science that goes into a field that we say non-local because it exists outside of space-time. And that's where your soul is, because your soul is the most fundamental core consciousness of your being. So before I go any further, let me ask you to do something right now as you're listening to me. Called listening to me. So now turn your attention to who's listening. Okay, so as you're listening to me, just become aware of the listener. And if you feel a presence, it's the only word I can use, that's you. That's your core consciousness. It's not your mind, which might be saying, I wish I'd gone to the bathroom before the lecture. Your mind is a conversation that happens in the presence of your soul. Okay, and it comes and goes. That was the great insight of the great teachers like Buddha. He said everything comes and goes, but it all comes and goes in the presence of consciousness, which is always there. It was there when you were a baby. Different mind, different body, different personality, whatever, but that presence was there, and it's there now, be there tomorrow. And if you pay attention to it, and you learn a little bit about it, you'll go beyond the fear of death, because you'll understand that this presence is not in space-time. Space-time are imagined, construed, governed, and constructed in this presence. Even space-time are projections of this. Okay, so that's all the science, the metaphysics, whatever, and I have to caution you that not everybody agrees, but more and more people will agree in the future, because it's inevitable, the old paradigm is falling. Now, what's the practical aspect of this? The practical aspect is you can get in touch with your soul, you can get the meanings and contexts and relationships. There's an old story that sums it all up. A story again of the Buddha, and he's standing on the streets of Benares with his favorite disciple Ananda, and it's crowded. India was crowded even 2,500 years ago. There's traffic on the street, cows and horses and whatever. And Ananda says, since it's going to take a bit of time to clear the traffic, why don't you tell me the meaning of life? So Buddha points to the wheel of a chariot that's going by. He says, life is like that wheel. And the wheel is karma, memory, and desire. Karma, memory, and desire. Karma is all the choices we made in the past. Memory as a result of that in our consciousness. And then memory leads to desire, imagination, and that leads to karma again. And he said, that's the wheel of the soul's journey through cosmic time. So actually, it's not so difficult to get into touch with your soul. You have to ask yourself very few questions, which is what I do at Kellogg, by the way. I get people into a room and ask them silently, write down the answers to these questions. And don't worry if you don't have the answers. Write the first thought that comes to you. In fact, if you have to think a lot about it, you probably don't know the answers. So just write down whatever comes to you. And one refines this process. And the questions are simple. Who am I? What do I want? What's my purpose? What's my contribution? What's a good relationship mean to me? What's a good friendship? What are my unique skills and talents? How do I use them? Who are my mentors in history, in mythology, in religion? What's a peak experience? Those peak moments of joy that we experience when you're watching sports, or you're playing, or you're listening to music, or dancing, or in love, or seeing a baby, or having a child. You remember those? What did you feel like? What creates joy for you? Write down the answers. And if you don't have the answers, don't worry. Live the questions. So based on this, and a few little minor practices, paying attention, because I told you earlier, we're entering a new era called neuroplasticity, where we can see how we, in fact, your consciousness, your soul, if you will, can rewire your brain. And you should find this very easy to understand. There's a saying in neuroscience now, neurons that fire together, wire together. Okay, so if you can start firing neurons together in certain pathways, then they get hardwired to do certain things. You can hardwire your brain for success, for your higher potential, to live the best life you want. So we have three parts to the brain. The first part is called the midbrain. It's a bulbous extension of our spinal cord. It's also called the reptilian brain because it evolved over 300 million years ago. And it's responsible for what is called the fight or flight response. You go next to a reptile and you make a sudden noise or a sudden movement. If you're close, it'll attack you. If you're a little further away, it'll slither. So that's called the fight-flight response. I remember in medical school when we tried to remember the functions of this part of our brain, we used to call it the 4 Fs: feeding, fighting, fleeing, and reproduction. Okay? So this is our midbrain, 300 million years old. The second part of our brain is called the limbic brain, and this is our emotional brain. So this lies on top of the midbrain. It's about 100 million years old. It's found only in mammals. And mammals are all mammals, by the way. They have families. They nurture their young. They sing. Did you know that all mammals sing? They all play with their children, all mammals. They protect their children. They protect their families. They have emotional relationships. And so what we're discovering now is that the experience of emotional connectivity, which is caring, affection, love, compassion, kindness, these emotions actually cause our limbic brains to resonate with each other. So right now, for example, my limbic brain is monitoring what's happening in your limbic brain. But your limbic brain is monitoring what's happening in your emotions and at the same time what's happening in your endocrine and autonomic nervous system, what we call self-regulation or homeostasis, because your emotions, if you're feeling joy, happiness, love, compassion, kindness, equanimity, then your feedback loops, what we call homeostasis or self-regulation, it's in balance. If you're feeling anger, hostility, resentments, guilt, shame, fear, then the feedback loops are disrupted. The body is not in balance, it's going to feel sick sooner or later. And your limbic brain is doing this, by the way. But your limbic brain is not only monitoring and regulating your own internal state, physical and emotional, it's monitoring the physical and emotional state of people in this room. And without your conscious awareness, your limbic brain responds to things like eye movements, body language, tone of voice, facial expressions, and a few things, very subtle. So let's say there were some people here feeling resentment, hostility. The limbic brains of other people will pick them up, and soon their blood pressure will start to go up, their immune system will start to compromise. The reason I'm going into such detail on this is that science is showing that we are so connected, that we depend on each other, we monitor each other's emotional states, but also physical states. I am monitoring and you being monitored by your physical and emotional well-being. And I'm dependent on you. Because if you're screwed up, sooner or later it's going to mess up my physiology if I'm in your environment. And now because we have the ability to connect through social networks, through emoticons, through sentences, we are actually, our brains and our minds have become entangled physically, okay, and culturally. You don't have a separate mind. Your mind is constantly being monitored and is entangled with and monitoring minds across the planets, across the whole planet, horizontally and vertically, because we transfer meaning through culture. So our minds are basically entangled. And this is Buddha's insight. He said all suffering comes from the hallucination of the separate self that doesn't exist. And now we know it doesn't exist, All you have to do is go to the internet and LinkedIn, and we're all entangled. Okay, so this part of our brain, which is the emotional brain, is so crucial to our well-being. The third part of the brain is the cortical brain, which is only 4 million years old. So guess what? When we are in a crisis, this part of our brain, which is the big part, the 4 rational part of our brain, it basically is overridden by the emotional and the reptilian brain. And the big challenge for us now is how do we use the cortical brain to bring about emotional intelligence in the limbic brain and totally override the impulses of the midbrain, which is of no use to us unless your house is burning. Okay, then you need to run. Okay, but otherwise, this midbrain is totally of no use. Can we create ourselves? That's what the leaders have to do, okay? Can we create a brain hardwired that it never reacts in a reptilian way, that it is emotionally and spiritually intelligent, that it can, no matter what the situation is, harness the forces of intuition, insight, creativity, imagination, and choice. Imagine what that would do to us and to our society. So based on this, here's my very simple formula, and I just want to show one slide before that, which is just an introduction to the paradigm that consciousness creates all of reality. Moods, emotions, how we think, our environment, our culture, our behavior, our biology, social interactions, personal relationships, perception, even nature's forces. Why do I say that? Because nature's forces inside your body are not different than nature's forces outside. They're the same. Electricity, magnetism, electromagnetic activity, the strong and weak forces, gravity. It's not, this whole idea that me and the universe are two separate things is obsolete. Okay, you are the universe. There's no boundaries to I. Okay, if you say the I that I call me myself, I, is squeezed into the volume of this body in the span of this lifetime, then that I can't be found. Sorry. The only I that can be found is the I that is universal. Okay, so it's a very interesting time now for us because, I am the biggest fan of technology. And I study technology as no one else. I'm fanatical about it. And what I'm being told by the experts in the world is that in 10 years, our capacity will It's doubling every year. Our technology is doubling capacity of technology. So in 10 years, it's going to be 1 billion times what it is today. In 20 years, it's going to be, you can't imagine. It's beyond our imagination. But the way so if you're against technology, forget it. You're going to, Darwinian principle says you will be obsolete and gone. Okay? The question is, how are we going to harness the power of this technology? Because I actually believe technology is the manifestation of God through the human nervous system. The internet is the new planetary mind emerging. The neural networks are being laid down by you right here in this building. Okay? And it's not just connectivity, it's nurturing. I'd read your values, the thing, it's nurturing relationships, because networking should be an obsolete word. It's not, it's very kind of manipulative and devious. But relationship could heal the planet, could do anything, could create, right now if you say, what are the big problems in the world? Well, the first is violence, war, terrorism. The second is a world where 50% of the world lives on less than $2 a day, 20% on less than $1 a day, radical poverty in a world with the kind of imagination you and I have. It's inexcusable. So social injustice, poverty, ecological devastation. We've kind of totally destroyed the planet. And basically that. So can we repair this? And so I personally feel that technology is in fact the divine manifesting through the human nervous system and saying, what are you guys going to do? Are you going to keep the old atavistic, barbaric values of the fight-flight response, survival of the fittest, in which case, goodbye, the human species was an interesting experiment that did not work, or are you going to make a choice? And in that choice, you will be the force of evolution for the universe. Literally the force of evolution, because these are tentacles these are prostheses that are extending our mind. And so there's a major responsibility, but it begins with us. And so here's a very simple formula for leadership. Okay, and it's the word, leaders. Look and listen. Look and listen with your body, with your mind, with your heart, and with your soul. And it's very simple. We can sit down in less than a few hours in a group and say, what are we listening to internally? What kind of world do I want to live in? What kind of society do I want to live in? What kind of community do I want my children to grow up in? What kind of business, what kind of professional organization do I want to work in? What's my role in that vision? How do I participate in that vision? So going to the deepest part of ourselves and creating that vision that comes spontaneously, by the way. You don't need to have to know the answers. If you ask the right questions, life will move you into the answers. But you have to ask the questions, and you have to go to this deepest level. Analysis, rationality, emotions, but most importantly, the incubation in the soul, where every answer exists, because that part of you is connected to the intelligence of the total universe. The Sufi poet Rumi, he says, you're not just a drop in the ocean, you're the ocean in the drop. So that's the first part. The second is emotional bonding. I know a lot of new literature on emotional intelligence. Okay, so emotional intelligence is basically how do you get in touch with your own emotions, how do you get in touch with the emotions of others, and how do you manage relationships. So it's basically self-awareness, self-management, awareness, social awareness, and management of relationship. But it's much more than that. Emotional bonding means a deep caring, where there is affection, where there is appreciation, One of the other things I do right now is that I'm involved with Gallup in collecting data, and Jeff and I have spoken on the phone to the CEO of Gallup. Fascinating data. Very important for you to know this. So if you work in an environment, and this is a good environment, I can sense the energy, but you work in an environment where your colleague or your superior ignores you, your likelihood of getting disengaged goes up by 45%. If your colleagues or the ones you're reporting to doesn't ignore you but criticizes you, then your disengagement falls to less than 18%. You would rather be criticized than ignored, because when you're criticized, you exist. Okay? But if your colleague notices a single strength that you have and says, notice you do this particular thing you do well, your disengagement falls to less than 1%. Okay? This costs the United States economy $380 billion a year. 20% of our workforce in this country is not only disengaged, they're actively disengaged, which means they're unhappy, but they go to work to make other people unhappy. Okay? So, and there's lots of very interesting data on how do you become happy yourself. Do you see opportunities where there are other people are seeing problems? You know how to make another person happy, because as soon as you make another person happy, you feel happy. Okay, we're so connected that now they're saying unless you're in some social engagement for at least 6 hours a day, and that, by the way, includes texting and sending emoticons like I love you and a hug or a kiss, that if you do that, you'll be a healthy person. Okay, and that you have to create an environment of playfulness, of caring, of emotional engagement, where you actually nurture each other's ability to stay in a state of joy, in a state of caring, in a state of kindness, in a state of compassion, and in a state of equanimity. So equanimity combined with the energy that comes from connecting. Okay. Emotional mourning, there's a lot more to say, but awareness, which is basically what are people's needs and how is the best response to fulfill those needs. Now, in the research in Gallup, we found that of leaders, the four most important things that people expect of their leaders, the four most important, one is hope, second is compassion, the third is trust, and the fourth is stability. That's what is expected unconsciously. Your limbic system will respond to hope, compassion, trust, and stability. But it also responds to, does this person really care about my needs? And, we have needs. Security, achievement, feeling of ownership, which I noticed one of your values. Ownership, feeling of ownership, feeling that this is something that I own, that this is, I'm part of this family. Feeling of self-esteem, how do you go beyond the lack of self-esteem that's built into a lot of people in our society, because, they heard these programs, their brains became programmed for lack of self-esteem as children because of all the stuff they heard in their environment. Can you go beyond that? Can you question your limiting beliefs and you go beyond them? So awareness is basically, what am I observing? What am I feeling? What's the need? What's the best way to fulfill that need? Dare to dream, but also to do it. Otherwise, you're a philosopher. Are you action-oriented? Do you know how to make smart goals? Do you know how to stretch beyond your reach? Do you know how to record your progress? Do you know how to measure it? Do you know how to set time limits? Goal setting is good only in the context of our collective agreement, which needs emotional engagement. Empowerment. Now, at Gallup, we noticed that the best way to empower people the best way to empower people, and good leaders do that. They're not interested in personal power. They are interested in empowering people. The best way to empower people is, first of all, use their strengths. Okay, if you'll find a way to find out your strengths in the book, but if you want to go even beyond that, go to Gallup or organization, and you can identify what you're really good at. Okay, and good teams use the best things that you're good at, your strengths. Okay, so if you want to be empowered, use your strengths. I was telling my daughter the other day, because my granddaughter loves piano and singing, and you should see her face when she's doing that. Okay, and the other day she went to play volleyball and she didn't feel so good. So, I tell parents, if your child likes to play tennis and is poor at mathematics, then get him a tennis tutor, and one day maybe he'll get Wimbledon and hire a mathematician to be his accountant. So, we focus on people's weaknesses instead of their strengths. If you want to empower people, nurture their strengths, enhance their self-esteem, and make sure that you understand their values. So when we train people, I create what is called a soul profile. A soul profile is asking you certain questions, so I know the things that you value, and that if you live up to your values, if you have a sense of self-esteem, if you are using your talents, you'll be empowered. And there's nothing like a team that is empowered. Responsibility, action orientation, but also taking initiative, taking calculated risks. There's no leader who became a leader if he didn't risk, but not reckless risking. Risking that comes from a deeper understanding of context and meaning and relationship. And then the most important thing is, of course, living up to your values and being responsible for feedback, and maintaining good health. I think there's no excuse these days, when we know so much about well-being, we know so much about neuroplasticity, we know so much about genetic indeterminism. In 3 to 4 months, you can turn on all the good genes in your body and turn off all the bad genes. Okay, unless there's a mutation, which means a pathological mutation. So 95% of the human population has normal genes, and it's up to you to either turn them on or off. So if you have good sleep every day, if you exercise every day, okay, not once a week, twice a week, every day, you'll be energized. And if you feel tired, to exercise then, because that's the best time to exercise, is when you're tired. Brings up your energy. So good sleep, exercise, a little bit of quiet time, 5-10 minutes, close your eyes and just watch your breath and do nothing. Okay? Healthy relationships, and try avoiding anything that comes in a can or has a label, and you're all set. Okay? It's not rocket science. Okay? So health is, and you'll turn on the good genes and you turn off the bad genes, and you can also train your brain to always override the next time you feel upset, stressed, just stop and just watch your impulse to react till it goes away. That's it. You do it enough time, your brain will hardwire itself not to react. Okay, once you've become good at that, then hardwire your limbic brain for caring, love, compassion, and joy and equanimity. And you can do that just by imagining acts of loving kindness, thinking of someone that you love. Just imagination of that will start creating the connections. So, we have the ability to reinvent our body, literally, by resurrecting our souls. And the final thing here is synchronicity. Synchronicity is when this is actually now good research on it, that great leaders, when you ask them, what made you so extraordinarily successful in your business or in the work you do, they always say one of the following things. I was lucky. I happened to be in the right place at the right time. There were many meaningful coincidences. God was on my side if they're religious. It seemed a state of grace. Now, I suggest to you that this is all the same thing. It's synchronicity. It's the nature of the universe, actually, where everything is connected to everything else. Why do you think you're called linked in? Okay? Because we're already linked in. And you're not just linked in to other people, you're linked into the forces and elements of the whole cosmos. Okay, now with our technology, it's easier, but you're already linked in. So, when you experience coincidences, ask yourself, why did this happen? Again, don't need to know the answer. Okay? If you create a story around yourself which is strung across the beads of coincidences, you'll have a magical life. In fact, if you look back, where you are today is because of coincidences. Where you're sitting right now is because of coincidences that occurred in your life. But they will all happen, you read this ad, or you met this person, or you went to this party, and then, you ended up marrying that person. But if you start to notice coincidences, life is magical, because you can consciously then choreograph the story of your life. And in the end, I just want to say that, LinkedIn is a brand. And I'm reading right now here, relationships matter, open, honest, constructive, demand excellence. And I think that should be the motto. Pursue excellence, ignore success. Because if you focus on success, you'll have stress. Okay, you're always looking at outcomes. But if you pursue excellence, success will be guaranteed. Okay? So, yes, I like that. The intelligent risks, calculated risks, ask like an owner. Transformation. The world can wait for its transformation. If you begin with personal transformation, the world will transform. All it needs is a critical mass, or what do we call these days? The early adopters. Yeah. So if you have enough people transforming, the early adopters will change the world. And humor. What is humor? Humor is understanding and being comfortable with paradox, ambiguity, and contradiction. It's a shift in perspective. You want to hear a joke? This guy goes to hell, and the devil is showing him around, and he sees this 96-year-old codger with the 25-year-old girl, and he says, "That doesn't look like hell to me." And the devil says, "It is for the girl." Okay. Results. Results have to be measurable. They can't be a pipe dream. And you have to agree on what the results are for you and when you want them. If you don't set a time limit, that's not good enough. And if you set a time limit, consciousness has a way that you get the results before you get to the time limit. There's so many more things to say, but I think I will stop here, and I'm happy to answer questions. Just want to do this. This is our foundation to participate with individuals and organizations in helping to create a critical mass for a peaceful, just, sustainable world, healthy world. And we have 3 activities: education and research. We have an annual meeting called Sages and Scientists once a year. We even give out an award to the best scientific contribution to spirituality. We are engaged in networks for personal and global transformation, and always looking to use the best technology, wellworld.org. People who are engaged in personal transformation, who want to connect with others. We are partnering with a foundation in India called Akshay Patra, where they send children to school for $10. You can send a child to school for a year, because the government of India partners with another $20, and for $30 you can send a child to school and educate the child and feed the child. $30 a year. And the child may have started in a gutter and may end up at Harvard. And then we also partner with an organization in Europe called the Start Fund, which offers funds to people who want to set their own entrepreneurial, they want to start on an entrepreneurial adventure. Thank you. There's a mic here in the aisle. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Actually, I had like two questions. One, you said that I saw the things where consciousness creates these things, and one of them was force of nature. So I'm trying to understand how that works. And the other one is because it seems like the planets, and for example, are based on. It seems like the forces of nature are sort of outside of consciousness to me. The other is, you said you're talking about Occam's razor with regard to the soul. Isn't it possible that another alternative, which is equally simple, is that the soul is basically distributed throughout our brain or within our body, essentially is tied to our body in a
So
way?
let me answer the second question. Yes, spiritual traditions say the soul is transcendent and immanent. Transcendent means non-local, outside space and time. Immanent means everywhere in space-time, in your body as well. So that's the second. Now, the first question was about forces of nature. There are 4 forces of nature. Electromagnetism, which we know, is heat, light, electricity, and the internet. Electricity, magnetism, which are the same force. The second is the strong force, which holds the nucleus of an atom together. Otherwise it would blow apart with all the positive charges. The third is called the weak interaction, which is responsible for radioactive decay. And the fourth is gravity, which holds the world, makes the planets go around. Now, according to unified field theorists, the first 3 have been unified, which means they have the mathematics to say that electromagnetism, strong and weak interactions are the same force. Gravity is the mystery right now. They're trying to figure that out. But your body has the same forces. It's because there's only those 4 forces. So when you have an electrical storm in your synaptic networks, the same the same charges produce the electromagnetic storm in a cloud, right? Lightning in the sky, lightning in the neural network. But lightning in the neural network produces a thought. Wow. Okay? So there is some thinking now that photons or electromagnetic forces carry both subjective and objective information. Objective information, I send you information through LinkedIn. Connect with me. Subjective information, it starts with that in my consciousness. Okay? But if the whole universe is these same forces, there are few scientists, not all, who are saying the whole universe is a conscious being, that the universe is imbued with subjectivity. It's a thinking universe. It just doesn't think in English with an Indian accent. But we are part of a living organism, Not only our planet, but the whole universe is alive, which is exciting. Because then one day we'll be able to talk to it. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chopra, hello, my name is Edward Wayne. I'm a designer at Linking. So let me talk about the experience I had last night. I go to a website called WikiLink, and there's a video inside it. It's shooting in Middle East.
It's what?
There's a video inside it.
Yeah.
It's shooting in Middle East.
Yes.
So there's American soldiers sitting in helicopters, and he using his machine gun to kill people on the street. You can see a man go down, a woman go down, the children go down just like trash, just like pixels in the computer screen, right? So at that moment, it's like I feel extremely depression. At that moment, it's like I do feel like it's worth it. It's like nothing gonna help this. It's like Facebook not gonna help it, LinkedIn not gonna help it, in terms of like the challenge, the consumption of compassion or love or caring is wired inside us. So if you extend the concept of I or like consciousness in terms of like the self, it's like, can I include that American soldier as part of my conscious, as part of the concept of I?
That is what the Buddhist monk would do. Mm-hmm. See, the Buddhist monk first, when they meditate on loving kindness and compassion, they first bring in their consciousness the image of somebody they really love, their child, or their husband or the person they're in love with. And then they bring into their consciousness somebody neutral. You look at somebody and you say, that person has happy moments and joyful moments just like me. That person is going to grow old like me. That person one day is going to get sick like me. One day is going to die like me. That person is just like me. And when they think and ruminate, they're actually their neurons. This is the new research, that they are rewiring their brains. But then you do it for that soldier, the same thing. It may be very difficult for you, but you do it, okay? And when you do it, because we are part of this web of connectivity, if enough of us do it, then it'll have an effect. Because, there's no separate self. Now, having said that, even more interesting to me, actually, is that with WikiLeaks, with Facebook, with LinkedIn, with all the thing that is happening, nature is very interesting. It has a self-correcting mechanism. You see, that's Darwinian also. If you are not part of the evolutionary theorists are saying we're moving from survival of the fittest to survival of the wisest. Okay? So fittest was, the midbrain. The cortical brain and the emotional brain is the wisest, which means that our survival depends on nurturing in the future. In fact, our whole body is hardwired. Even our self-repair mechanisms in a baby are structured through the love of a parent. Okay, so the more we start doing this, but even if we weren't doing it, because of the way evolution works, the predators will become extinct. It's a principle. A permanently victorious predator risks its own extinction. So you don't have to worry. The evolution is always ahead. 10 years ago, did you think we'd have this technology that we have today, even in the social networks? 10 years ago, we didn't have it. The internet started when? 1995. 15 years of see where we are. You can't even imagine what's going to happen. So as long as you and I have the right intention, and we're kind of saying, you felt sick after seeing that, right?
Yeah, of course.
So that's the entangled mind. Something happens in the Middle East, and now you look at it on the internet and you feel sick. You don't want to feel sick. So change.
Thank you very much.
Hello.
Hi.
So sometime back, I came across a presentation which talked about what makes a leader, and one of the key points of that presentation was a lone leader doing his own thing on its own is a lunatic, pretty much. It's the first follower that makes the leader a leader. So growing up in India, this concept was pretty much inbuilt into everything I read, even looking at scriptures. Wherever there was the leader in form of Ram, there was this amazing follower in form of Lakshman who believed in the leader and followed him and made sure that everyone else helped essentially give the leader a group of followers. So. But what I see is everywhere you look, you're always talking about how to be a good leader. Nobody's talking about how to be a good follower. And there's a lack of, imbibing that sort of a value system that it's also important to recognize when you need to be a follower and not a leader. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. Our whole concept of leadership is in contemporary society is changing. So the concept now, one of the things that has become very popular is the concept of servant leadership. The leader is the servant of the followers, okay? Because the leader is there to fulfill their ideas, their aspirations. He's their symbolic soul. So leaders and followers create each other. Now, I try to stay away from despite all the beauty of the scriptures, try to stay away from the idea of followers in the sense that they're teams. Followers implies a certain kind of hierarchical structure where the follower must obey the leader. So, say, leaders and their teams and their colleagues. It's just politically a better thing to say. And the leader exists to actualize the potential of those that they lead, and the followers exist to actualize the leader's vision and part of that vision. But in the absence of emotional and spiritual bonding, that's not going to happen. They have to have that limbic resonance, you know. And finally, I want to say there's a new concept called starfish models, which you will hear about lots, as opposed to the spider model. You know, the spider, if you crush the head, the spider is dead. Whereas starfish, if you cut a limb, it grows 2 more. And if you cut all 6, then it grows 36 more. So the starfish model is that the leader so empowers others that at the end, the best leadership is where the leader is not needed. Everyone is empowered.
Thanks.
Okay.
Mr. Deepak Chopra, thanks for coming to LinkedIn.
Sure.
We all are privileged to hear you. My question is, as a parent, how do I teach or how do I talk to my kids about this? Honestly, I'm not as smart as you when it comes to, teaching these things. So how do we make sure that
This is what the research shows. It shows that children do not listen to what you say. Okay? So, in the first few years of life, there's a phenomenon that occurs. It's called mirror neurons. Children's neurons mirror the neurons of their parents, and what they listen to is the following things: the facial expressions, eye movements, tone of voice, which means, marenge, or I love you. Okay, the tone. The expression on the face, eye movements, and body language. So the more you can imbue in your children a feeling of nurturing, caring, affection, appreciation, and attention. Now, just remember these 3 A's: attention, affection, appreciation. Attention means listen to them. Don't interrupt them. A lot of parents don't do that. As soon as the child starts speaking, they want to interrupt and tell the child what to do, and the child is not going to listen anyway. So the biggest thing, the most respect you can give your child, even before the age of 3 years, is listen. Okay, and that child will feel listened to, will feel secure. Second, appreciation. Appreciation says, you're good at this. You are amazing. You're so beautiful, and it's not flattery. You feel that, don't you, for your child? So say it. So appreciation. And then affection is loving touch. Okay, in our society, this is missing. In Western societies, this is missing. It's that, in fact, we now know that the more a child is touched with caring, the smarter the child, because your neuroectoderm, this skin and the brain come from the same layers, same chemicals, and you build neurons when you touch affectionately and lovingly. Now, I've seen a lot of interesting research on this. If you feed rabbits a diet that's high in cholesterol, they get high cholesterol very fast, they die of heart attacks. But if you stroke them and touch them and you tell them you love them, rabbits, they don't get high cholesterol, because they make different peptides in the brain that turns the cholesterol in a different metabolic pathway. Now, in this culture, there are taboos on touching. So some social psychologists actually did studies, went to Florida and saw, in Gainesville, Florida, he waited in cafes to see how frequently couples would touch each other. The average number of tactile contacts per hour was 2. In Puerto Rico, it was 90. Okay? In Italy, it was something like 150. And in England, he waited and waited, nothing happened. Now, they have done studies correlating that with high cholesterol and heart disease and stress, because, you say Italians, my God, they don't have necessarily the best diet in the world. wine and olive oil and meat and this and that, but it's celebration. It's, there's a joy. Or over here you see people on texting, eating a sandwich and trying to drive at the same time. There's no mindfulness. So with your children, just do those simple things. Don't give them lectures.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.